Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we are diving into a truly ancient text, one that confronts maybe the most profound question a person can ask. How do you actually prepare for the moment of death?
And we're not talking about a philosophical puzzle. This is a high-stakes, practical guide to your spiritual destiny.
Exactly. Our source today is the first chapter of the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's this pivotal conversation.
Right, and the setup is key. The king asking the questions has literally been told he has 7 days left to live.
7 days. So our mission for this deep dive is to pull out the practical wisdom from that intense scenario. We're going to go from the text's really unforgiving critique of a wasted life all the way to a specific and frankly mind-bending technique for concentration.
And the goal really is to find the key to what the text calls abham.
Fearlessness. How to achieve that no matter how much time you think you have left.
And the text jumps right in. It validates the king's question immediately, calling it excellent, beneficial for the entire world.
The best thing you could possibly ask.
Precisely. And the narrator uses that urgency to just cut straight to the core problem. He talks about the life of those who are, and this is the phrase, not seeing the truth of the self. Apasyatam atmatapam.
And what comes next is this brutal takedown of a standard human life. It's so specific about how we manage or mismanage our time.
It is. It gives a complete breakdown. The night, it says it's lost to sleep and sensory indulgence. The term is vyavayena.
Okay, and what about the day?
The day is spent just chasing wealth. That's arthahaya, and, maintaining the family, kutumbavaranena.
It's an ancient description of the modern rat race.
It's exactly that. Constant work driven by things outside of you with, zero time for any kind of self-knowledge.
The thing that really stood out to me was the analogy it uses for our attachments.
The army.
Yes, the army. It says people see their body, their children, their spouse, as their atmasinisu, their personal army, their fortress.
That's the real insight, isn't it? It connects directly to how we think today. We rely on these external things for our security, our job, our savings, our social status.
But the text says people are so careless. Pramada, I think was the word.
So careless, yes, that they don't see the destruction of this army. They don't see their foundation crumbling, even when it's happening right in front of their eyes. Pasyana bina pasyati.
So if the end is coming, and our fortress is basically guaranteed to fail, that creates a real sense of urgency. What's the point of a long life then?
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
What good are all those external years paroksai hayani if they aren't focused on your actual welfare? Quantity of time means nothing if the focus is wrong.
And it gives an example to prove this, right?
A very potent one, the story of Rajarshi Khatvanga.
Who is the complete opposite of that careless person.
Exactly. Khatvanga knew the precise limit of his life. He knew his time was up. And the text says in just a single moment, amuhurtat. He gave up everything.
Everything.
Arhamujya. And he attained the Supreme Lord Hari. He turned that ultimate urgency into ultimate focus.
So that establishes the rule then.
Yeah.
It's all about the quality of your focus, not the quantity of your years. It's about preparing for that final departure of the Samparayikam.
Immediately.
Now, okay, so if the problem is this carelessness and wasted time, and the answer is focus, what is the actual preparation? What are the steps to get that fearlessness?
The prescription for getting to that state, to abham, is threefold. And it's all centered on the Supreme Lord Hari, who it calls the self of all, Sarvatma, and the controller is Vara.
So what are the 3 steps?
It's an integrated process. First, he must be heard about, Kirtavya.
Okay.
Second, he must be glorified, Kirtadevyasha. And third, he must be remembered, Smartavyasha.
So it's like a whole spiritual technology. Hearing gives you the information, glorifying it is how you process it, and then both of those lead to the main practice, which is remembrance.
That's it. And the text defines the ultimate goal right away. It says the highest achievement of being born human, the Janmabhapara Pumsam, is just this. The remembrance of Narayana at the very end.
Ante Narayana Smriti.
You nail that final thought, and you've basically won the game of life.
What's amazing, too, is how the text sort of asserts its own power here. It mentions the narrator learned this from his father, and then it makes this fascinating point about who this story appeals to.
Yes, I love this part. It says the narrative is so compelling that even these totally detached sages, the ones who are beyond all the rules and regulations.
The ones who don't have to do any of this.
Exactly. Even they find this deep joy, this ramante sma, just in hearing and talking about the qualities of Hari.
So it's not just a practice for people who are afraid, it's a source of bliss for the most enlightened people out there.
Which really underscores the power of the story itself. And it concludes that for anyone seeking total fearlessness, Akutapayam, focusing on the Lord's names, the Nam Anukitanam, that is the fixed final conclusion, Nirnitam.
Okay, so we have the why, this intense urgency, and we have the three essentials. So how do you do it? How do you actually go from a distracted mind to one that can remember like that?
And that's the bridge. This is where we get to the practical path of concentration, or dharana.
Right, but the first step is pretty radical. It says you have to become fearless first.
Yes, before you can focus on the ultimate reality,
Yeah.
you have to cut ties with your immediate reality. The text says you must sever attachment, spram, to your body and everything connected to it.
Using the weapon of non-attachment?
Asanga Sastrina. It's a fantastic phrase.
It really is. So if my attachments are my army, like we said before, I have to basically dismantle my own army first. So how do you do that in practice?
It starts with physical separation. The wise person, the Zira, has to leave the house, Virāṭ Puruṣa. You leave the center of your attachments.
Then you purify yourself, find a solitary place.
Right. The external environment has to reflect the internal state you're trying to create. You get rid of the objects of attachment to cultivate non-attachment.
And once you're there, the work turns inward. This is where it gets very specific.
This is the core of dharana. You start by meditating on the sound AUM, what it calls the pure, three-syllable, imperishable Brahman. That's your first anchor.
Then you control your breath?
Jitasasa, yes, to calm the whole system down. And then you use your intellect, the Buddha as a charioteer to pull your senses away from everything else.
That's such a powerful metaphor, the intellect as the charioteer. But the mind is always being pulled around by passion and ignorance, right? Isn't just focusing on a sound, an impossible fight.
Oh, would be. Which is why the text is clear that dharana isn't just one action. It's a steady, continuous process of destroying the impurity, the malam, that's created by those modes.
So you're scrubbing the lens, so to speak.
You are. The goal is to make the mind objectless, nirvisayam, and fix it completely on the supreme abode of Vishnu, where it finally finds peace.
And if you can maintain that focus,
Then the yoga of devotion, the Bhakti Lakshana yoga, happens very quickly. Focus leads to devotion, and devotion leads to that fearlessness we're aiming for.
which brings us to the king's next logical question. What exactly is the best thing to focus on for this kind of powerful concentration? The mind needs a form, an object.
And needs an anchor, yeah. And the answer it gives is, oh, it's astonishing. It says the mind must be fixed on the gross form of the Lord, the Stuli Bhagavata Rupe.
And this is where it gets so profound. Most meditation paths tell you to focus on something small, right? The breath, the point of light inside you.
Right, internal.
But this text commands the complete opposite. It says to focus on something impossibly large, the entire universe. Why?
That is the core teaching of this whole chapter. This gross form is the Virāṭ Puruṣa, the Lord contained within the entire cosmic shell. The universe is the body of the divine.
And the scale is the point.
The scale is the point. It's designed to break your mind's attachment to its own small, petty concerns. If you're meditating on the entire universe as a single being, suddenly your focus on, your bank account or your family drama, it becomes instantly insignificant.
It's the ultimate visual aid. Okay, let's try and walk through this cosmic map. How does it break it all down?
We can group it into maybe 3 main areas to make sense of it.
Yeah.
First, you have the foundation and sustenance.
The infrastructure of reality.
Exactly. The lowest realms, Patala, Rasatala, are the soles of the feet, the ankles, the shanks. The earth itself forms the hips. The sky, the Napastalam, that's the navel, the center.
So from the bottom to the top, it's all part of the structure.
All of it, all the way up to the highest heaven, Satyam, which forms the head.
Okay, so that's the physical structure. What about the forces that govern everything?
That's the second area, cosmic function and psychology. This part is amazing. The text maps time and our inner states onto the face. The eyes are the heavens and the sun.
And the eyelids.
The eyelids are day and night. So the entire cycle of time is just the unconscious blinking of this cosmic being.
That is a staggering image to meditate on.
And it gets even more personal. Death, Yama, is personified as the tusks. The terrifying smile is Maya, or illusion.
So the very things that drive us crazy are just parts of its smile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our morality gets mapped too. Shame is the upper lip and greed is the lower lip.
Wow. So even the scary negative things, death, greed, illusion, they aren't enemies to be fought. They're just integrated parts of this one gigantic form that completely changes how you'd view your own struggles.
It does. And the third category is the internal environment and society.
Okay.
So rivers are the veins, trees are the body hair, the wind is the breath. And this is the most intimate part. The mind, our mind is the moon, the container of all our emotions and thoughts.
And it even integrates human society into this body.
It does. The four social classes, the varnas, are distributed across the body. The thinkers are the face, the protectors are the arms, the producers are the thighs, and the laborers are the feet.
So this whole detailed structure, the sanavesa, this is the gross form that you are supposed to fix your intelligence on.
That's the meditation object.
Yeah.
The goal isn't just to see the universe, but to serve that truth, that satyam, that reservoir of bliss who is the ultimate self, the witness of everything, like being the one seer in a dream.
This has been an incredible journey. We started with this devastating truth about wasted time and the urgency of life. We identified the tools hearing, glorifying, and remembering, and that crucial first step, using the weapon of non-attachment.
And we landed on the specific technique, fixing the mind on this cosmic map, the Virāṭ Puruṣa, where the entire universe becomes the object of your focus.
And the final core command that holds it all together is, do not become attached to anything else, na anyatra sajijat.
Because attachment to anything less than this supreme form leads to what it calls atmapata,
The downfall of the self.
the spiritual degradation of the self. Yeah, the whole system is designed to convert any amount of time you have, a lifetime or single moment, into permanent, liberating knowledge. The focus has to be on fearlessness.
The careless person is lost in their attachments. The fearless person cuts them away and focuses on this all-encompassing reality.
Right. So here's the thought for you to explore. The text prescribes remembrance of the Lord's name or form for anyone who wants fearlessness, akudapayam. So if the entire physical universe, from the most distant star to the deepest ocean, from your personal greed to your sense of shame, is explicitly laid out as just the gross body of the being you're supposed to remember, what does that imply about the actual power and scope of a single, highly focused thought that's dedicated to that entity?
What does it mean if the object of your thought is everything?
Exactly. Is it possible that a moment of that singular concentration is actually designed to make you the master of all of it? That's the challenge this ancient text leaves us with.
Today, we're going to dive into a really powerful chapter from an ancient text called the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a huge work, but we're zeroing in on a part that starts with a question so direct it just cuts through thousands of years of philosophy and speaks to us right here, right now.
Okay, just take a second and really think about that. 7 days, not a year, not even a month, just 1 week. What drops away? What suddenly becomes the most important thing in the world? You know, this isn't just a thought experiment. It's the very question that kicks off one of the most profound conversations about life, death, and consciousness ever put to paper.
So, let's set the scene. We've got this powerful ruler, King Parīkṣit. I mean, this guy is at the absolute peak of his power. He has everything anyone could possibly want. But then, in a single moment, his entire world gets turned upside down.
He gets hit with a curse. He will die from a snake bite in exactly 7 days. So what does he do? He gives up his kingdom, goes to the banks of the river Ganges, and he asks the great sage Shuka this one ultimate question. He's not asking for a magic pill or a way to escape his fate. He's asking how to use his last moments perfectly. What is the single most important thing you can do when you know the clock is ticking?
Just 7 days. That number is so important because it just shatters the illusion that we have all the time in the world. It forces you to immediately and radically rethink everything. It makes the king's question not just some philosophical idea, but something incredibly urgent and deeply practical. Now, before answering the king directly, the sage tells him a quick story to show him that, hey, this is totally doable. He talks about another king, Katwanga, who found out he had only a single moment left to live. And in that one moment, he let go of everything, focused his mind completely, and achieved total freedom. So the point is massive. It's not about the amount of time you have left, it's about the quality of your attention.
With that little bit of encouragement, the sage finally begins his answer. But first, he kind of holds up a mirror to how most of us, not just the king, spend our precious limited time. And honestly, it's a pretty sobering diagnosis. First off, a huge chunk of our life, the sage says, is just gone. The night? It's completely consumed by sleep and other bodily needs. We're basically unconscious for a third of our lives. Okay, so what about the daytime? Well, that's spent in this constant, frantic rush, making money, managing all our responsibilities, taking care of family. All necessary things for sure, but they completely soak up our attention. So, the sage puts it all together. Between the nights spent asleep and the days spent hustling, we get deeply attached to things that, let's be real, are not gonna last. Our bodies, our families, our stuff, we think of them as our protectors, our army, but we forget that they and we are temporary. So after that pretty stark diagnosis, the sage offers the prescription. He reveals the one practice that can give a person true fearlessness, even when facing the end. And this is it. This is the core of his teaching. The way to conquer fear is to turn your mind toward the ultimate reality, which he calls Hari. And the method has 3 parts. You hear about it, you talk about it, and most importantly, you constantly remember it. This totally reframes what it means to live a successful life. The sage says that the goal of all spiritual practice, all yoga, all philosophy, is to be able to fix your mind on this one essential truth right at the moment of death. Your last thought is literally the fruit of your entire life's work. Okay, so the what is clear. Remember the divine. But how? How do you actually do that, especially when our minds are so used to being distracted all the time? Well, the sage gives a practical, step-by-step guide. He lays out this classic yogic path. It starts with a really decisive mental move, using the weapon of non-attachment to just cut the cords to all your worldly worries. Then, you physically remove yourself, go somewhere quiet and sacred. From there, the practice turns inward. You stabilize your body, regulate your breathing, and then you consciously pull your mind back from your senses, from everything you see, hear, and taste that's constantly pulling you outward.
This whole process is designed to get you into a state called dharana, which is just a term for deep, one-pointed concentration. The idea is to purify your mind by giving it one single, powerful thing to hold on to, so that all the other distracting thoughts and worries just naturally fade away. But what should that one thing be?
And this is where the teaching gets truly mind-blowing. The sage offers an object of meditation that is so vast, so all-encompassing, that it leaves no room for anything else.
He tells the king to meditate on the Virāṭ, or the universal form. This is the idea of seeing the entire cosmos, every planet, every star, every mountain, every river, not as a bunch of separate things, but as the living, breathing limbs of one single, magnificent, divine body. So how in the world do you even begin to grasp an idea that big? Well, the sage makes it really accessible. He says, don't try to see it all at once. You build the image systematically, piece by piece, from the ground up. The meditation starts from the bottom. Imagine the world's deep beneath us as the soles of its feet. The surface of our earth becomes its hips and its waist. The vast dome of the sky is its navel. The constellations of stars scattered across the night, that's its chest. And the highest heavenly realms, that's its head. And every part of nature gets woven into this incredible vision. The sun becomes its eye, seeing everything. The directions, north, south, east, west, are its ears, hearing everything. Fire is its mouth. The clouds floating in the sky are its hair. And the rivers flowing across the land are its veins, carrying life through its body. And here is the absolute genius of this meditation technique. If your object of meditation is literally the entire universe, what could possibly distract you? Every sight, every sound, every passing thought just becomes another part of the very thing you're focusing on. There is nothing external to it. Your mind gets completely and totally absorbed. The sage then brings it all home with this final instruction. He says, focus on this true, blissful, universal reality. Because being attached to anything less than this total vision, any small, temporary part of it, is to miss the entire point. That attachment, he says, is the very definition of our downfall. And so, that ancient advice for a dying king becomes a question for all of us, living our lives day by day. The sage offered the entire cosmos as a worthy object of our attention, which leaves us to wonder, in our own lives, what small worlds, our worries, our ambitions, our screens, make up the universe that we choose to focus on.